Oh, good to have you with us. So it was the big talking point over the past few days. We had wall-to-wall coverage of it. Such an important conference. It was the 55th National Conference of the ANC. It has ended and has elected new leadership. It includes the party's highest decision-making structure between conferences. That is, of course, known as the National Executive Committee. The acronym we all know is the ANC-NEC. So while the conference at Nasrec did come to an end, it didn't get all of its work done. We know that the top seven, the Super Seven, if you were, those were voted in, but then there was talk around when we were going to get the names of the ANC-NEC. Now, to remind you, those are 80 members, 80 members of the ANC. It's essentially the highest decision-making body. You take those 80, you add the top seven, which were voted in on the weekend, and you have the ANC-NEC. Now, one of those members, Mdumiseni Ntuli, is an ANC-NEC member joining us this morning. And it's been a rough couple of days, Mr. Ntuli. I'm sure you've all been sleeping since then, but the work begins now. I want to ask you and start by this. So the conference at Nasrec itself has ended, but there has been some kind of adjournment. You didn't get everything done that you wanted to. What happened? Help me understand.
Good morning to you, and good morning to the viewers at home. And thank you very much for having us this morning. And maybe I should also convey my gratitude to the ANC members and structures who have selected us to serve in the National Executive Committee, a responsibility that is very, very important and fundamental for the work of our movement. The conference, as the Secretary General has pointed out, had to be adjourned to be reconvened early this coming month, early next year, in order to conclude its business. I think it has already done probably 70% of the work that needed to be done. And the reason why it is going to reconvene, as the SG explained it in detail, is to ensure that we conclude the business around some of the key resolutions that must still be discussed by the National Conference in order to mandate the apex leadership of our movement, the National Executive Committee, for the next 5 years.
And of all the issues, and I'm sure there's many commissions that you had at the conference as well, there's many policies that need to be discussed. Give me the number one policy that stands out for you, Mr. Ntuli, that you would like as an NEC member to address early in January 2023. What's the one standout policy or commission that you think needs the most attention?
Well, there are two areas that the ANC had to be that's why I'm expecting the National Conference to really adopt very, very important and elaborate resolution on how to go about. The first one is the renewal of the African National Congress. I think the conference is expected to spell out in some detail what are the practical tasks that we need to undertake in order to ensure that we achieve the renewal of the African National Congress. Because, as you know, this is the vehicle that must help us to implement policies on economic transformation, to lead us in the battle against unemployment, to fight poverty and inequality. So the central task for me that must emerge from this conference is how do we improve the quality of the ANC at the level of its membership and at the level of its leadership. Because unless we have quality at that level, it is almost impossible that you would have the capability required for you to discharge these other responsibilities on the economy, on fighting crime and corruption in the country, on dealing with the triple challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. So for me, the central task really is how do we ensure that we protect the ANC, that it survives and that it has a quality leadership, which will be able to shoulder the other responsibilities, as I've said, as part of the reconstruction and development of our country.
I'm so glad you spoke about the term of quality cadership as well. We heard the ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa talking about that at length, Mr. Ntuli, inside the plenary session where obviously a lot of media and you were. And then we get to the voting of the ANC-NEC. You are a part of it, of course. But when you talk about quality membership, it does raise the question, why do you believe we no longer have big household names? And there are many. I'll give you three. David Mabuza, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, and Batabile Dlamini as part of the NEC. What was the temperature in the room when that voting was happened? What do you make of those, let's be fair, household names not making it into the top 80?
Well, a few of them are still there. Comrade Mamkosan Dlamini Zuma, for instance, is still a member of the National Executive Committee, of the committee. There are a few others that did not make it. And I suppose the National Executive Committee, the newly elected NEC, will have to decide what role and responsibilities are assigned to those comrades in order to ensure that we don't lose their skills and expertise. But you see, the ANC is an evolving organization. What is exciting for me is to see a number of us who are emerging from a younger generation of the organization, including, for instance, those who still belong to the ANC Youth League, who are elected in the NEC. I'm quite certain that those comrades that you are defining as the households who are not re-elected in the National Executive Committee are not going to be lost in the process. The period in which we find ourselves today requires that we must really strengthen the movement in all its fronts. We need the energy, as the SG had said a few days ago, but we equally need the wisdom and the experience in order for that energy to be channeled into the right direction. So I'm quite certain that the NEC is quite capable to ensure that whoever may have not been elected in the NEC has a responsibility and a role to play to defend the movement and to advance the cause of the National Democratic Revolution.
And talking about household names, Mr. Ntuli, yours was certainly one of those names which became often spoken about in the build-up to conference and at conference itself. You were one of those contesting for the position of Secretary General. That's now gone to Fikile Mbalula. Do you think you could have done a better job?
Well, not necessarily. I think myself and Comrade Fikile Mbalula, both of them are coming from the ranks of the ANC Youth League, and both of us, in fact, are coming from the ranks of the ANC Youth League, schooled in that movement for many years. Of course, he has been there ahead of me. I don't think that, in fact, I'm very excited by the fact that we are both elected into the same National Executive Committee, of course, with him as the Secretary General and myself as part of that NEC, because what I know as a matter of fact is that whatever ideas and new interventions that one would have wanted to make as the SG of the ANC will still find an expression in the National Executive Committee and in the course of our work. Because once you have elected the leadership in the ANC, that leadership becomes one, and it has to move as one to complement each other, to ensure that we all succeed. Because if we work very hard as members of the NEC to complement the work of the top seven, and their own success will be our own success, as it will be the case that their own failures will equally be our own failures. So I don't think that anything will be lost by the fact that one had contested for the position, and the position was Common Bucks was elected into the SG. I see this, for me, as an opportunity. I'm saying it's an exciting experience. Looking at the composition of the NEC, you will have that energy, you will have that creativity that is required, and of course, you would have the skill and the talent at the disposal of the top seven for them to exploit in the advancement of the cause of our movement.
I mean, like in this case, it seems you might have gotten off a bit lucky not being the SG of the ANC, because Fikile Mbalula is getting quite a bit of criticism about how hard he's coming out the gates. So in that very first press conference, I was in that press conference when he was there, saying that anybody in the ANC not towing the party line is going to be dealt with decisively. They're not going to put up with this voting out of the ranks, etc. What do you make of some criticism leveled at the SG as someone who was contesting that, saying he's coming in too hard, too fast, too aggressive? What did you make of his first press conference?
Well, I think the criticism is essentially unfounded, in a sense that if you are the SG, you have to serve. You are at the fulcrum of the organization. You are the center that must maintain shape and keep the direction of the party, and you have a responsibility, as the SG himself said, to ensure that the center is holding, and that all of us who are members and elected into the organization serve the organization selflessly, wholeheartedly, but with maximum discipline. Because without discipline and the centrality of the African National Congress, we may as well take our bags and go home. So I think it's quite correct when he says that the center has to hold. When the ANC has taken a decision on any question, irrespective of how I feel about that decision, I have to be abided by that decision and come back to the National Executive Committee as a member of the NEC if I'm not happy or I was not happy, and say, you know, I lost a debate on this question. I believe sincerely that the decision taken by the movement need to be revisited. Yes, I've gone ahead and implemented the decision because it has been a decision of the NEC, but I think there are weaknesses within this decision which we need to revisit. So nobody should have a free rein to say that if the NEC takes a decision and I'm opposed to the decision, I'm at liberty to go ahead and implement my own views. Because if you work like that, you cease to be an organization. You become a federation of individuals or a conglomeration of set of individuals who are not having anything that binds them together. And in our case, what binds us together is the principle and is the values of the African National Congress. And one among those is the centrality of the party, that once the party has taken a partner position, all of us must abide and we must respect and come back and complain later.
Let me ask you this, perhaps as a second last question, as I begin to close our conversation, Mr. Ntuli. I want to talk about the makeup of the ANC's NEC for the moment. One is the male-female demographic. I want to hear from you. Some people are saying that this NEC, having more women in NEC positions is good. Some critics suggesting it's actually more wallflower than actually getting anything done. I'd like to get your thoughts on that criticism. And two, the racial makeup of it. There aren't that many people of Indian descent, of colored descent, for example, in this. And I see the NEC being picked up on that as well. What do you make of the racial demographic and then the male-female split?
I think the male-female split is quite good, and I think what people might also might have not recognized is that it's not just a dominance of women; it's a dominance of relatively young women, comrades who are still, some of them who are entering the NEC like myself for the first time, others who have been in the NEC but who are in the middle ages, late 30s, early 40s, and I think that is a good combination of experience and talent, which is required at the level of the National Executive Committee, given the fact that South Africa itself, the ANC must always strive to be a microcosm of the South African society, particularly in terms of the racial composition, as well as in terms of the gender and the youthfulness of the population. I think this national conference was very alive to that aspect. Where we are running short a bit is to respond to the racial composition of the National Executive Committee, which indicates a bigger challenge that society faces. It's not an ANC problem. It's a societal problem. Of course, it becomes an ANC problem primarily because the ANC has to always position itself in terms of its conduct, attitude, and articulation as a leader of society. And therefore, it must be an example of what it wants society to be. So this matter about poor representation or a lack of the composition at least among those who are coming from the white population, our comrades from the Indian and colored communities, is a challenge that the ANC has to deal with. But I'm saying,
and do you think it's something that can be addressed before 2024, Mr. Ntuli? Because elections aren't far away. Non-racialism is one of the key elements of the ANC in their manifestos. But I mean, if you look at this, we've got no members of the Indian population, one colored woman and one white woman. It doesn't exactly scream non-racialism, at least it doesn't appear to. How do you fix that between now and 2024? It's fairly urgent. I'm sure you agree.
Yes. I think the National Executive Committee has one of the mechanisms that it has, for instance, is that it had a right, it has a right to co-opt at least 5 comrades into the National Executive Committee. That would be one of the mechanisms that can be used in order to ameliorate that situation and to find a way in which you have a better representation in the National Executive Committee of the comrades who are coming from But I just want to make the point that the composition on its own does not necessarily mean you now have realized a non-racial society. A non-racial society will be realized or achieved whenever and at the point where, when you are electing leadership, You don't even have to consider whether this comrade is black, African, white, Indian, colored. You just elect a leader on the basis that this is a leader who's going to be able to live up to the expectations and the demands of the moment in terms of the national democratic revolution. But the reason why the composition becomes important, which in my view is the form rather than the content, is to ensure that once you succeed in entrenching the form, it sets us on a great path and a firm foundation towards the realization of the content, which is, in essence, the non-racial aspect of our society and the African National Congress. So I do want us to have a clear distinction between the form and the content, not meaning that the form is not important. It is important, but on its own, it must never be understood as the end in itself.
2024 is not far away. We'll wait to see what the South African public and ANC members make of what happens between now and then as far as the makeup of the NEC is concerned. I appreciate your time this morning. NEC member Mdumiseni Ntuli was contesting for the SG position, but is certainly a member of the National Executive Committee of the ANC.